Tonight we're beginning Unit 7, and you can see the topics for Unit 7. We're going to cover 3 chapters, chapters 10, 12, and 13. I know some of you were wondering why we skipped over 10, and basically we skipped over it so that we could look at these topics together, because I think they fit well together. I am going to be working off the PowerPoint here as a guide for discussion. I did post it along with the topics for the chapter. So I'm going to start right here and start talking about, I guess, something you don't really think about because we've been focusing so much on coding and, learning how to do our tags and good structure and CSS and what it all does, that we need to start turning our attention to the actual work that we're doing. And this is a part of being in IT that's a little bit weird for people that are coming in, because when you come in, you get this impression you're going to be glued to the screen all day writing code. And there will be times that will be the case. But when it comes to working on a real project, you're going to discover that 80% of the work is doing everything but coding. And that's kind of what this unit is about, is learning about the things that kind of circle around a project and how you create websites. Now, there's a lot of different roles that you can play, and they have a list here of, if you were working, let's say, in a large, enterprise situation, what kind of thing would you be doing? Notice when you look up there, where the heck is the web developer? Oh, way at the bottom. Just one of, like a dozen different roles that you can play. All of them are important. And when you work in an organizational environment and you're working on a project, chances are you're going to work on a team. You'll probably have a team leader or a boss or both. And then you'll probably have people with different roles on the team doing different tasks. And it'll really depend. It depends on the kind of project it is, how big it is, what your organization is like. I mean, you might only have a team of 2 people. Or you could be like I was for many years, it's an army of one or whatever that slogan was. Army of me, I'm not sure, something like that. But you see all these different roles, and some of them you might not even be familiar with what they do. I think, network admin, database admin, that's pretty intuitive, right? Graphic designer, those people down the hall that do the artwork so that you don't have to worry about your JPEGs and your PNGs and your Illustrator and Photoshop files. That's very common. Then you have the copywriters and the content managers, and those are people that take care of the stuff that gets printed on the page. What are the words that we're going to put on the website? You just put whatever on there? No. You think about it. You think about it real carefully, just like you would if you were, creating an ad or an article or a brochure. You don't just throw anything out there. There's people that work on that, and the wording that's chosen, the content that's chosen is chosen very carefully, especially for big organizations. Notice you also have people from marketing, right? Well, of course, because websites that's one of their primary functions, especially when they're not functional websites. They're meant to be sites that promote something. And then we have an information architect. Anybody want to venture to guess what that one's for? Yeah, I mean, okay, I'll buy that. Anybody else have a thought? Yeah, right.
In this case, it might be an umbrella that covers it all.
That's right. We have people like that here at Gateway, too. Basically, people that kind of oversee everything just to make sure things are falling into place. I mean, it might be like the CIO or somebody like that, or somebody who actually has a title like information architect, to make sure that we're following all the things that we're supposed to do, that we're fitting into all the systems we need to fit into. And then there's one right there that I kind of skipped over, the user experience designer. I've been working from bottom to top because we're at the bottom for some reason. We should be at the top. And that's kind of interesting because really, in some ways, the stuff that we're doing, especially in this chapter and in chapter 13, really kind of focus more on that type of a job. And a lot of people are completely not familiar with what a person like this does. And ironically, somebody who works in user experience design might be one of the highest paid people on that list. Now, the fun thing that I do when I teach a web project management class, when you guys get to the last semester of your degree or thereabouts, like if you were doing it in 4 semesters, trying to boom, 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 knock it out full time, semester 4, which would be next fall, you would be in that class, and we use a book about user experience design to guide the course. And really what happens with the user experience designer is they look at how a website functions. Now, I understand that you guys are registering for classes right now. Did they just change WebAdvisor again? Does it look a little different? No? Okay. Well, that's probably a good thing because I got an email that they're changing it. Again, right. You know why they're changing it again? Because what they changed it to isn't very good. I'm not kidding. Unless they figure out some tweaks for it. Because we use this old primitive system that even though it wasn't the prettiest, it really functioned well and it was easy to find stuff. Right? And then you get used to it. And then all of a sudden they put a friendly new face on it. And it looks great. Got these little slide downs and pop-ups and colors and all this stuff. But oh my God, it doesn't work. Where do I go to, to do something? And people that do user experience design are concerned with things like that. Now, you guys know what a wireframe is, right? Right? User experience designers are usually the key people that work with wireframes. They're the ones that interface with the users. And users aren't necessarily just external customers. They could be internal customers. Anybody that uses the website. There's a lot of different roles that they take on. But that's a very important one. It's a very in-demand position. There's people that make well into 6 figures that do that role. So I always try to, put that out there. Of course, there's project manager too. You can probably consider me the manager, I guess. All right. Some of these slides, I'm just fair warning, I'm going to be kind of going through some of them really fast, and some of them we'll focus on a little bit more, which is fine. Now, depending on the kind of organization you're in, and what they're trying to point out here is that you might wear more than one hat. Like I very often, when I do projects, I play all of those roles. Or I'll play the role of like maybe graphic designer, network admin, and web developer. Or maybe just project manager. Frankly, it depends is really the appropriate phrase. And it depends on your organization. Generally, the larger the organization, the more specialized they are in doing web development projects, the more apt you are to have all of those roles going on. There's that little thing there, they say outsourcing. That happens too. Outsourcing is a big thing because sometimes why would you pay to put somebody on staff full-time when you can just hire a firm to do it? Or get somebody on a contractual basis. There's a lot of contract work in IT where you get paid pretty handsomely if you know what you're doing. You just go to a place, work on a project for 6 months, maybe make a year's worth of pay in that 6 months, and then you're done. And if you work fast, you might be done in 4. Now, there's some drawbacks to that, of course, right? Because usually you don't have benefits. But if you're really ambitious, you can make a whole lot more money being a contract worker than you are a regular worker. But there's a lot more pressure on you at the same time. Now, take a look at this little list here. And those of you that had me for that orientation class, portfolio, right? Being educated, that helps. The game has changed. When I started in IT, if you just walked into a place like, I know computers, you got the job almost just like that. It was ridiculously simple because so few people had degrees, so few people had experience, and the people that did worked on these big mainframe systems. Most of them hadn't worked on PCs much at all. That's changed though. Lots of people have degrees now in this field, and I want you guys to keep in mind that even though you're a tech college, you will walk out of here probably with stronger skills than people coming out of 4-year places. Because we tend to do a lot more do it. And I think I've probably told you that a lot. You notice that last bullet there, though, industry certifications. Those can help in IT. I don't know how relevant they are for web yet, but there's a lot of web certifications that are coming out now. The one that's tied into this course, and if you were in our SharePoint cohort program that we're running out in Burlington, we actually teach to those certifications. And I have a link right here, actually a few of them. But if you successfully pass this course, don't look at the price tag. You should have all the skills you need to pass this certification exam. And there's some challenging stuff on it, and usually what you have to do is get materials to study with, look at videos, read up on it, and then you go take the test. But what's cool about it is you can go take the test, and then you can walk into a job and say, not only did I get my 2-year degree, but I also passed this official Microsoft certification. And I'm not going to say that it's an easy certification, but it's totally attainable. If you do well in this course, you should be able to pass it. And usually when you see those fees, they will give you 2 tries typically to pass for that fee. In the old days when I started in IT, the certification to have was the MCSE, Microsoft Certified System Engineer. Basically it meant you knew what you were doing, sort of, hopefully. But the reality back then was that it wasn't necessarily the case, because we would get people that would go out and study and could pass the test, but then you sit them down in front of a machine and they couldn't do a darn thing. And a lot of IT certifications are like that. But if you have education, you have experience, and certifications, lots of doors will open for you. So just keep that in mind. And those of you that are in the program, there's many of our courses that really line up with certifications by design. So for example, if you take the Java 1 course, you're ready to take the Java 1 certification from Oracle. And I've had students do it and pass. And some of those certifications, the Java certifications, I think are pretty valuable, because I think they do prove a certain level of skill. Okay. All right, let's talk about something that's very important. You'll probably get a lot of this as you go through the program, depending on your teachers. But there's actually a way that computer technology works. And it's not by mistake that we do things a certain way. We work with computer systems, right? Systems are formally defined. Like, somebody sat down and thought about all this stuff. It didn't come out of thin air. Somebody said, well, we have a system. Systems have inputs. Systems process things, and systems have output. And really, those are very simple components. And really what it breaks down to is input, processing, and output. And if you start thinking about all the stuff you do in technology, that's kind of the case, right? Whether it's something as simple as like moving my mouse to the screen and right-clicking, right? There was some sort of input. The input was right-clicking. The computer did some code in the background, and the output was putting that box up on the screen. Now that paradigm extends beyond software. It also extends to how we do projects. And that's really kind of the point here. So what we're going to see here is some of these cyclical patterns that we have for doing project work. So take a look at the very top of this diagram. It says conceptualization. Somebody has a thought, hey, we need a website, or we need to improve our website, or we need a piece of software, or something like that. So there's an idea or a need that's identified. And then from there, in order to try to actuate this, you would move yourself over to figuring out what you need to get it done. There's an analysis phase. You gather what's needed. What do we need to do? We need a beautiful looking website. We need it to sell stuff. We need it to, perform these certain actions. And then you sit down and you define the solution. So you figure out, well, we can do it 20 different ways. Which way are we going to do it? What software are we going to use? What people are we going to hire? What techniques are we going to employ? And you conceptually build the project. Notice the word conceptually. It doesn't necessarily mean you're coding anything yet. You get to the point where you actually do the work, the production part of it, do some coding, and then you're on to the testing phase. The testing phase just ensures that it all works the way. I mean, have you guys worked on a site, you think everything's good? You maybe have done it already. And then you go back and go, oops, that link doesn't work. Right? So you have to test the site. And the bigger the site is, the more testing you need. Finally, if everything's okay, you deploy. You launch the site, you make it public. The moment something goes public, all of a sudden you switch modes from development mode to maintenance mode. Because anything that's up and running is going to need to be maintained. Websites included. So you might do patches, you might do updates, all sorts of little tweaks. As you're going through this process here, you also start to go, you know what I really liked? That one thing that we did worked great. That other thing, not so much. Next time we do this, when we go back to this process again, you'll develop a whole bunch of additional things you want to work on. And in large organizations where they might work on a website redesign for a year or two, by the time you're done and you're deployed, you're already working on the next iteration of the website. What it can do next, or what it can do better. And that's why this is a big cycle. Now, here they've defined 8 different steps. And really this falls into a formal approach called the System Development Life Cycle. And the acronym is SDLC. And depending on where you look for information, it'll have anywhere from 5 to 8 to 12 steps. Usually you see 5 or 7. This book indicates 8, but really the steps are basically the same. Notice though, folks, one of these boxes is coding. Just one. Not what you think you signed up for, right? So what's fascinating about all this is when you start working in this sort of a format, you're going to start to realize that it's not just about your IT skills. It's also about the skills that you bring to the table in knowing how to deal with people, talk to people, email, how to provide feedback, receive feedback, all these little, like what we call soft skills that might seem not important for a coder, but they are. They really are, especially when you're working with others. All right, at this point, they're kind of starting to break down all these steps little by little, so we'll probably fly through most of these quickly. So when you conceptualize, you figure out who you're selling this tool to, and then, what are you really trying to do? What's the goal? What are you trying to really achieve? You can see long-term and short-term. And many projects are like, well, we need to do a website that's going to boost our sales. That's a good goal, right? If we develop a website and our sales go up by 20%, awesome. It was totally worth it. Or if we intend to reach a new audience, or we're trying a different type of approach. So if you decide what you're going to do, then how are you going to do it? Well, there's costs involved for sure, right? You might look at your competitors' sites, absolutely. What kind of things will the site do? What will the site do? Not how it will do it, but what it will do. And I think that's a pretty important thing that he added to the slide there. Absolutely. All right, we've talked a little bit about this stuff, wireframing, and little mock-ups that you do and little drawings. You can do it by hand or with software just to get an idea of how things lay out. But you have to figure out an approach. There's a lot of different approaches to building websites. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. There's certain websites that fit into certain conventions, but the truth is, what you build really depends on what your objectives are. We were doing this with my project management class where I just used an example. All right, so if I go to a newspaper site, I'm going to go to the Journal Sentinel site because I haven't been there in a while. Let's see what it's looking like these days. All right, and their goal is to give you the news. So they have kind of a news-like format. They usually have columns and little articles and links to a whole bunch of different stuff. And they have revamped it. Boy, pretty ad heavy up top though, right? Well, you got to pay the bills somehow. Nobody buys the paper anymore, right? Everybody gets their news from Facebook because it's real. That's a joke. But what if I go to a site, I think I use Pepsi as an example, right? What are we going to find at the Pepsi site? Totally different type of approach here. No menu on the top, no columns and information. I mean, they're selling something, right? And take a look at the way the page operates. It's different. So whatever you might think about it, positive or negative, the navigation's different. They have this like long scrolling effect that they do. Now you might not even think of doing a site like this, but this is Pepsi. These are the people that spend millions and millions of dollars on Super Bowl ads. You think they probably paid some guy $500 to make the site? You might find somebody for $500 that could build you a site like this. But they put a lot of thought into what they put out there, how they put it out there, the colors they use, all those objective kind of things. And clearly, this is intended to sell their product, right? This isn't like the corporate homepage. Completely different, right? Or if you were, a reseller or a retailer, something like that, you would get a completely different type of view. But that's the point, is really to get you thinking about how you're going to do a website and why you're doing it a certain way. All right, so you're building it. Tools you use. Well, it depends, right? You can use Notepad if you want. Chances are, if you're working professional, you'll have a whole barrage of tools available to you, and you'll probably find ones that suit you well. A lot of people tend to be, either kind of on the Microsoft side of things, where they'll be Visual Studio type people. They'll work with ASP.NET and those types of tools. You get the open source world, it tends to be more PHP. And then you get the people that kind of sit in the middle and do both. And the tools on either end will depend on the work you're doing. The smart thing is to know both sides of the coin, and we try to teach that in the program. So hopefully you guys will latch on to that. Yep. Test, test, test. Notice different browsers, different browser versions. So not just whatever Internet Explorer you have on your machine. You might even go back to a machine that's running XP and Internet Explorer 7 and see what happens, especially if you know your audience might be using that. Different screen resolutions, that's pretty easy, right? Just make your browser bigger, smaller, or maybe actually look on a tablet. Use some of the emulation tools that are built into the browsers these days. There's also websites you can go to. You pump in a URL, it'll emulate what it looks like on different operating systems, because that's one thing that I'm noticing they're not listing here. A lot of people use Macs. I mean, it's not huge, but 10%, something like that. A lot of people use phones, all different types, different bandwidths, different locations, absolutely. Before you deploy, you want to make sure it works in every scenario, because you don't know how the user is going to look at it, and often you don't know how the person signing your check is going to look at it, so you better make sure. In fact, what I would always do is like, oh, you use a Mac or a PC? Get into a little conversation, get a little information, make sure it looks good for what they're working with. Testing tools, you guys learned about the validation already. Have you guys discovered that it's helpful? Have you guys discovered that even though your code might appear valid, that it sometimes isn't valid? Have you figured out why? Maybe not. If not, we'll talk. Here's an important topic too, usability testing. And this is one of these things that we as designers often neglect because we don't think about it as we're working. And frankly, I didn't really think about it a lot until I started kind of switching the way I did projects. And when I started working with somebody who was a designer that really thought about these things, then I started to shift my mindset. Because before it'd be like, oh, I got the menu up there, what's wrong with it? It's a little too pink, or whatever the case may be. But also, we were talking about WebAdvisor before, and it got me thinking, when I go to WebAdvisor and I log in, these are the kind of screens I see. And when I look at classes, I don't know if you guys see this kind of view anymore. You still see this view? Here, I'll get you to sign up for my classes for the spring. Sign up, please. And you still get this listing? Okay. What did they change then? I know you guys have this like blue and white thing going on. Oh, virtual student services? Okay. Well, the reason this isn't fresh in my mind is this morning my SharePoint students out in Burlington were all trying to get registered for the spring, and they have a different registration process. And they're like, wow, they totally changed it. I don't know what to click on. Where do we go? Do I have to do this one first? And, they discovered all these like really weird nuances. And just listening to them, not even watching them, I'm like, well, obviously there's like bad navigation on this site. And did I show you guys like our room reservation system? Did I do that with you? Oh, this is wonderful. Let me show you some bad usability. When we as faculty want to reserve meeting space on campus, we have the capability to do that. We go to the Gateway website and we log in. Once we're logged in, we're taken to a separate page, different than what the students see, and we can reserve a room, right? User-friendly so far, pretty easy to operate, I think. And then we sign in again. And now I want to reserve a room. So I look around the screen and I go, okay, create a reservation. Sounds good. Create a reservation. No. I don't have any of my events. Okay, how about book now? So book now is what I actually want to hit. Now watch this. All right, well, I want to set this up for tomorrow. Oh my God, it actually works. This is genuinely a surprise. Because typically, when I use this with Chrome, that calendar doesn't pop up. Maybe they fixed it. So, even though we're Chrome and Google centric at Gateway, I'd have to like jump out of here and go to Firefox and then bring it up and do the booking. Let's see if it actually works though. Okay, it seems to work. All right. So it's kind of cumbersome, And anybody designing this, if they would sat down with the user and go, over there, the one that says book now, why can't they make it like big and blue or green or red or, click here. I mean, it sounds really silly, but there's truth to it though. And, yeah. Yeah. Begin the step one. Click here. And I don't know what you guys do for a living or if you've ever done anything for a living because we have young people here too. But I know, like I've seen projects, for example, where we used to take kind of old mainframe systems and convert them to modern systems. And a couple of the ones I can think about were like banking related, school registration related, where not even 20 years ago, a lot of those systems were like these green screen, like DOS looking kind of applications, right? And the people that use them on a day-to-day basis, they knew exactly, oh yeah, I press Control Enter F9 space Alt Shift and it prints, right? And then they like switch it. The system underneath is the same, but they create a new interface. And then you sit there and watch those people and go, God, I don't know what to click on. I want to print. Okay, well, go here, click that, click this, go there, click this, and it's like I got to go 5 screens deep to hit print. In the past, I just hit F9 and it just printed. So the person who designed the system never even thought about checking with the people that actually use it to see if it works. And if it works for the people doing the work. So it looks great, but it takes you twice as long. I don't care how much more modern it is. It doesn't necessarily mean it's better. So, but there can be redesign that's not only better, but much better and really improves business operations. So that kind of stuff is figured out by doing this type of testing. So who do you test? Well, who's using it? Websites don't just get seen by the outside world. What you guys are looking at with our room reservation system is an internal website. Websites are also used to deliver applications. They're really becoming much more of that, where it's an application delivery platform as opposed to just putting a page out there. It's becoming the primary way to deliver applications, whether we realize it or not. Got to keep it running. You got to know what you're doing to keep it running. Excuse me. But what happens, and we talked about this earlier, is as a site is running, you start to find the problems. Maybe they heard. Maybe I whined about it enough that somebody overheard said, "Oh, I heard him talking about how the thing doesn't work in Chrome. Maybe we should fix it." Or maybe somebody realized it, or somebody else complained about it, or maybe 10 people complained about it, or 30 people complained about it. I mean, because here they push us to use Chrome. And so people that aren't that literate and are using Chrome and they're trying to book a room, how many tries do you think they're going to make before they're on the phone calling tech support? And tech support's like, we logged 50 tickets this week on how to book a room. It shouldn't be that hard, right? So that's part of the evaluation process, is the number of support tickets you have, or the pages that are broken. So that will help you plan out what you're going to do next. And then ultimately what happens is when you're done with that step of it, you go back into the whole process again. The process is a cycle, because if you have an application or a website of any sort, really any sort of information system, you're in that cycle somehow, consciously or not. All right, we're on to slide number 17 now, and we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. So we're not talking about project methodology and techniques. Now we're looking at some other high-level project considerations. As web designers, we hope that the work that we do eventually ends up out on the web, right, where the world can see it. Now, in order to be able to access a website, we use what we call a domain name. Those of you that have had any amount of like networking instruction, or maybe you're currently in the intro net web class, or maybe you've just read on it because you're interested, the way the computer networks operate is all the communications are done with numeric addressing systems. So in other words, if I want to go to a particular website, I can type in an IP address. So I'm going to give you an example, because I've been working on building a new web server here for Gateway, and I actually have it up and running already. It's operational, and I've been changing the homepage every couple of days just to have something to do. But I put up this silly little web page, but look at the web address. It's a number. So it's not like joeswebsite.com. But if you do want to have a name for your website, you have to buy a domain name. And domain names come in a lot of different flavors. Now, everybody knows that there's .coms, right? In fact, that's still the domain that everybody wants to have. But what's interesting, they don't just give them to you. You have to buy them, right? And not only do you have to buy them, but they can either be very reasonable or very expensive, depending on what you want to get. The problem with the .coms is that everybody has already rushed in and bought all the ones that you might think are available. And interestingly, um, when the whole capability of buying your own website domain, the name, there were people that were like, hey, I'm really into Coca-Cola. I'm going to buy one called Coca-Cola.com. With no thought in mind that at some point Coca-Cola might want to have that one, right? So guess what happens? That person gets to sell it to Coca-Cola for a boatload of money. Although there have been lawsuits that say, hey, you can't use our trademark to build a website and our name, but those are different stories. Now, when you try to figure out how to get a domain name, does anybody know how you do that? Yep, GoDaddy is a big one. There's a lot of websites. I mean, it's just as simple as you want a website, you can just type domain name, and a whole bunch of stuff will start popping up. So domain names are interesting because basically what happens with domain names is anytime you type in something that's got an alpha character name to it and you press enter, keep in mind computers don't know how to translate that natively into where it's going. So somewhere there's a server out on the internet, or a whole bunch of them actually, called domain name servers that receive the request and say, oh, joeswebsite.com, I know where that is. It's over here. And it points to that machine, and then the traffic can route properly. And I got to think that happens in like a flash of a second, like milliseconds, real quickly. But every time you do that, that's what's happening out on the web. Now, if you're actually looking at buying a domain name, and we had somebody mention GoDaddy, you end up buying a domain name basically based on the criteria of a top-level domain. The top-level domain is this part of a web address. It's the .com. It's the .edu, the .gov, the .mil, the .us, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I don't think a lot of people are aware of how many top-level domains there really are. And so, I bring up a list. Excuse me. Apparently that's not the right list. One of these, like Wikipedia ones, how about this? List of. And I want it to be from Wikipedia. This is more like it. So when we originally started out, these were the top-level domains that were approved because they figured this should be enough. Now, this is a long time ago, mind you. But .com, and that's the one that people prefer to have. There's .org, .net, .int, never really saw that one. I'm sure they're out there. .edu, that's us. .gov and .mil. And that's what they started with. They also had what they what they call infrastructure domains, and ARPA is actually the organization that originally helped to start the internet, a government agency, Advanced Research Projects Agency. So some of the early versions of the internet were actually what they called ARPANET. So if you ever hear that term, that's where it came from. Now, a while back, they started saying, well, that system is a little bit kind of ethnocentric to like us here in the English-speaking world. What about all these other countries? So what they did is they started developing two-letter top-level domains for every country on the planet. So if you scroll through this list, you will see a list of every country and their top-level domain. All of them are two letters. Some of them you'd never even think. I guess I've never been to Bonaire. Some of them you might be able to guess. You might have seen Canada ones. Maybe that one. And then there's weird ones, and I'm going to scroll way down here towards the end, where you get these tiny little like island nations, like Tuvalu. Have you ever seen any websites that have a .tv? Never? Yeah, it's actually pretty popular. In fact, one of the top ways they make money is by selling domain names to like networks and shows and stuff like that that want a .tv, top level domain. So that was kind of one of their things. What's interesting though is a few years back, they started adding top level domains in native languages. Now, this is interesting. Like if you can read Arabic. What's interesting about the Arabic one is the dots here because it goes from right to left as opposed to left to right. Right? So a lot of them can be expressed in the native language. Now the one that I'm familiar with, I know how to, I'm Greek, so if we were doing this in English, that translates to .gr. That's the country top level domain. But if you're within the country and you're typing on that in that language, it's epsilon lambda, right? Sorry. So here they are. If you're curious, some interesting languages there. And then a few years back, and I can't tell you exactly when it was. It's been a while though. The people that manage all the domain names, it's an organization called ICANN, and that's kind of interesting too, because this is an organization that was controlled by the United States up until just a few months ago. And then they released it to the international community with a lot of trepidation from a lot of people here in the U.S. because now they fear that others will try to take control of it. Truth is, it's still very much under our control. And this organization basically started out at the University of North Carolina. That's where they were holding all the registries of all the domain names. And it kind of grew into this other organization. But at some point, they said, well, having these country-level domains, having .com, whatever, those are kind of limiting. So they started to come up with these new ones like .biz. Did you guys see those ever? And they came up with one for adult websites, .xxx. You guys probably didn't know that. But then they started creating ones that are just whatever word you want it to be. In fact, if you want to have a domain name that is like .gateway technical college, you could cough up the money and pay and have it created. Now, whether or not somebody would click on it or not, that's a different thing, but it's absolutely possible now. And we're starting to see people that are out in the field actually latch on to these. I had one of my groups of students working on a website, and I don't see it. Oh yeah, there it is. .cafe. So they were doing a website for a place called On the Way Cafe, and they were like, onthewaycafe.com? No. .biz? No. They came up with, okay, on dash, the dash, way dash, like all these different ways to spell it, none of which were particularly user-friendly. And then I'm like, well, they probably have .cafe. And so they bought ontheway.cafe. And they were a little resistant at first, too, because it's not normal, right? But you're going to see a lot more of that coming down the line. So if you're looking to buy one, it's not a bad approach to take. And there's many of them. Some of them are available universally from just about any registrar you want. Some of them are only available from certain registrars. And the ones that actually hold the publishing rights are listed here. Apparently Donuts is really big into it. But you can see all the different domains that are available. Right? Pretty extensive, isn't it? And if you bundle with that the capability of creating your own, sky's the limit. And frankly, it's about time. All right. So if you're going to be looking for one, where do you go? How do you get it? Somebody threw out GoDaddy. I'll use one that they had a big denial of service attack. Yeah. DYN, right? Yep. They got it, and you can Google it really quick. DYN, denial of service, and it was just a couple weeks back. They managed to bring down Twitter, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, like all these big players because they all get their services from there. All right, so this is a website that I use often to look for stuff, and there's a gazillion of them out there. This is not the only one. A lot of people use GoDaddy because they're probably the most popular. But the bottom line is you go to one of these sites, they all pull from the same databases, and you type in a name. So if I wanted to search for, I can't even think of anything right now. Snow is coming. Of course it's not available, but it tells you what is not available, but they'll show you what is available and various alternatives and what the prices are. The prices that you see are typically annual prices. Now, one thing I recommend for anybody who's serious in this field, or at any point in time ever plans on having any sort of career of prominence, right? You should go out there and you should buy yourname.com if you possibly can, right? Before somebody else does. I'm just wondering, donaldtrump.com. It must be, I hope so. Who'd have thought it? All right, but what's even more interesting, though, is if you want to find out who owns the website, there's a service called Who Is. Who Is. And a lot of the sites that offer this sort of domain lookup to see if something's available for purchase will also have a service called Who Is. This site has a little link at the bottom here. But if you just went to your browser and just type in Who Is as one word, you can actually go to the organization that's responsible for it. And actually, this isn't the one. You got tricked. There we go. ICANN. So ICANN is the organization who holds the database. We just talked about them. And they have a Who Is page. And basically what you do is you just type in the domain that you're looking for. This is not for or against Trump. I'm just saying. I try to stay neutral. But what I'm going to do here is type in the stuff they're looking for, and when I bring it back, it tells me who has the name registered. Who owns it? Well, okay, the Trump organization, that makes sense. 725 Fifth Avenue, that's probably a Trump Tower, I'm guessing. Right? And hey, there's the phone number. Let's give Donald a call. And another thing, including all the contact info. And what's fascinating about this is you can see a lot of information here. Who the registrar is, how to get a hold of those people, the name servers. Name servers are the machines that point us to the physical server that holds the website. And when it comes out to like the actual raw data that's listed in the database, this is it right here. Now, the reason I had to fill in that little CAPTCHA thing where I had to type in those extra words is there used to be people that would come in here and search every possible website, extract the information, and use it to build spam email lists and gather information on people. You can actually privatize this information, so it's done by proxy, so nobody can see that you own the site. But otherwise, if you don't privatize your registration, anybody can see who owns the site. Also, when it comes up for renewal. Now, if it expires when you own it, you get 30 days after it expires to renew. Otherwise, it goes up for grabs. And if it's a good name, there's probably people waiting. There's services that wait for names to become available and then notify those that are interested, and then in some cases automatically buy it. One of my business ventures when I started it, the ideal business name was not available. So I had to choose something else. But then I did exactly that, as I paid for a service so that the moment it came up for renewal and it didn't get renewed and I was stalking it, I managed to get the name. And I didn't have to buy it from them. Their business failed or never got built. I don't know what the deal was, but I managed to get the name. So if you're interested in finding out information, you go to Whois. If you want to register or look for one, you can go to a place like GoDaddy.com or just do a search on domain names. Like I said, there's a zillion places that offer it. So that's an important first step in doing a website. All right, so they give you a couple of examples here. I think we talked about that. Now, the other aspect of this is buying the domain name is one part of it. The other part of it is the hosting. The hosting is where you upload your files to so that the world can see them. As students, we provide you with free hosting on Kronos. As a commercial entity or a private entity, if you get a website, you might go to a place like GoDaddy, and you can see they have domains, right? That's what we were just looking at, but they also have hosting. And what kind of hosting are you going to get? Well, that depends. Depends on what you're doing with your website. They're going to try to sell you on all sorts of stuff, I'm sure. But just to give you a little bit of an idea of what it costs, this is an example. Now, keep in mind these are all introductory prices, and just about every host has some sort of little intro gimmick. The reality is you always look at the real price, which is just below it. $4 a month is pretty good for the first year, or something like that. And then really it's $8 a month. And then if you throw in a domain name, which might be $10, $20 a year, so you can multiply 8 times 12 plus the domain name. So you're usually around $100 or so to have a website annually. There are ways to get domains and hosting for free even. And one I've been turning students on to if you just want to play with one, that's completely free. It's a site called X10 Hosting. There's no catch, except for you have to log into the admin control panel at least once a month. So if you want a chance to play with real hosting that's got a real control panel that doesn't cost a thing, here's a chance. And disclaimer, this is not the only one that does this for free. And what they're hoping is that you love the service so much that you'll buy a domain name from them and the hosting from them. And there's always some sort of little gimmick, but usually you'll end up paying, at the minimum of $50 a year. But if you consider what that gives you, that's pretty cool, right? It's a drop in the bucket, really. There's lots of different types of hosting. Most of the hosting that we get out there, especially that stuff that you saw listed just now for pretty cheap, is what we call virtual hosting, meaning that there's a web server out on the internet that holds many websites on one machine. And that's the most common way to get website hosting. Just like on Kronos, we probably have a couple hundred students with their websites. Who's to know, right? It's not like we're pumping, millions of dollars worth of sales through it like Amazon is. It's just a couple little student sites. There's also what we call dedicated hosting, where you get one whole server to yourself, but it's still out in the cloud somewhere. And then you can also, and I actually, believe it or not, I have a student right now, and I used to do the same thing. I used to just run my own servers at my own location. I got a big internet pipe, up and down speeds, synchronous ones. Back then it was 2 megs up and 2 megs down, and that was a lot. And then I had my own physical machines, and I would maintain them, and I would run websites on them. More than one. I ran many machines on the same machine, but I was my own host. And you can totally do that. In fact, it's not that hard to do. Any one of our computers that we're working on, Mac, PC, or Linux, has the capability to be a web server. Not only that, you can open up ports on your router at home to allow the traffic in and connect. It's not a big deal. If you're interested, just Google a couple things. You'll be surprised how easy it is. And typically, all the software you need is already in place. It's a matter of activating it. So, many different ways to do it. For many years, I ran my own, and then I started to crunch the numbers on, like, I have the equipment, I got to do backups, upgrades. I got to have some UPSs just in case the power goes down, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm like, or I can pay $20 a month or $10 a month and get all the same services, and I don't have to do any of that stuff. And I used to get like these little automated like emails and pager calls. We had pagers back then. 3 a.m. server's down. Oh, I can't remote in. The server's down. I got to like drive 10 miles to where the server is because it was in my place of business and not my home, right? So different types of hosting. A lot of the stuff we've already talked about it. Dedicated servers, co-located servers. For the most part, most of you and most all websites out there end up on a virtual host. These days, for not a lot of money, you can typically have unlimited storage, unlimited bandwidth, in some cases unlimited number of websites. So if you get the right kind of hosting, that type is a little more expensive, but that's the kind I use. I use like a business class hosting. I can put as many websites on there as I want for myself or clients, and somebody else takes care of all the problems. And there's hardly ever a problem. So it's really kind of the smart way to go. All right, folks, that wraps this chapter, talking about a lot of important things in terms of doing projects, knowing your domain names and hosting, project methodologies, roles that you might play in a project, all very important topics. These are things that when you get to the tail end of your program, we will revisit in the web project management class when you actually build a real project for a real client. And this stuff will all become relevant. No reason you can't explore it and learn more about it on your own, though. And I would encourage you very sincerely, all of you as web people should own your own domain name. That's something you need to do for yourself if you're serious about this. It's kind of like being a carpenter and not having a hammer, right? Renting one. You don't want to borrow school's hammer. You want to have your own hammer, and that way you can, if you could build up like 20 different websites just to play with them, what the heck? You got your own service you can play with, and nobody can say anything about it, right? Great learning experience. All right, that wraps this video.